I spoke with several aviation experts to try and determine the major causes of runway incursions. They came up with 5, and at the top of the list is situational awareness.
We would have a vehicle that was just doing a normal FOD check out on the runway. And then here comes Air Portugal Airbus coming in on final approach, and the controller just forgot that somebody was out on the airfield.
You might be thinking that something like that isn't common, that controllers just don't forget about something as important as having a vehicle or aircraft on an active runway. But think again. According to the Runway Safety Report, the most common controller error was a controller forgetting about a vehicle or aircraft. Situational awareness, the ability to be aware of one's surroundings in a complex and dynamic environment, is vital to air traffic controllers.
Your situational awareness has got to be at its peak anytime you're plugged into a position working traffic. The worst thing a controller can do is tunnel vision. And it happens in the tower, where they'll focus too much on the D-bright, they'll focus too much on their podium, they'll focus too much on the runways and forget about everything else.
What are some things that cause controllers to lose situational awareness? Dr. Warren Jensen explains.
I think a lot of runway incursions are caused by distractions. There's so much information that's given in a rapid fire format, and there's many different things to be looking at. I think it's easy to forget where you are or to forget what your instructions were.
But it's not just when they're busy that controllers run the risk of losing awareness of their surroundings. Sometimes periods of slow traffic present dangers as well.
It's when you start to wind down from maybe a busy period of traffic, and you and the pilot both are finally saying, oh, we can kick back a little bit, we can relax a little bit more. There's no issue for us to be concerned. And that's normally when it happens, when there's less traffic moving around.
Pilots also have a duty to maintain their awareness, but nobody's perfect. The ultimate responsibility for safety on the controlled areas of an airport rests with the air traffic controllers. So maintaining awareness of what pilots are doing is key.
Unfortunately, not all pilots use taxiway diagrams or airport diagrams when they taxi. Some pilots are in a hurry, and they may not take those proper steps. So the controller, of course, is the last line of defense, and the controller needs to be aware of the position of every airplane that's operating on its surface.
Another key issue that leads to runway incursions is complacency, and it affects both controllers and pilots.
First of all, an air traffic controller is going to tell you no, that we're never complacent. But yes, it does happen. It's human nature. What usually occurs is you're always telling somebody the same thing day in, day out. Runway 28 right, hold short, runway 28 left. Runway 28 right, taxi via Bravo, hold short, runway 16. That becomes an automatic every day from you, the controller, and you expect the same thing back compliance-wise with the pilot. And on occasion, it doesn't happen that way.
For pilots, boy, you start getting 1,000 hours of flying time, and the complacency factor becomes a real issue. Even when you look at accident rates, you see that after a couple of thousand flying hours, that their accident rates start to go up slightly. Typically complacency is the reason for that.
I think with any job, even if you're working in a manufacturing company on an assembly line, you start doing something over and over and over again, it just becomes, redundant.
One thing that makes complacency so dangerous is that it can strike when you least expect it.
It's when the traffic is slow and everybody reacts just a little bit less cautious. And so you've got to be aware that this can happen at any time, in any moment.
The experience level of controllers and pilots also plays an important role in runway incursions.
When you have a controller that's only got 2 years in the agency and they're being overwhelmed with traffic, they don't have enough experience to turn around and go, I need help. They continue to push themselves and don't realize what their personal limitations are. And that's when errors occur.
The number of new pilots in the air, put that together with a controller force that is doing a complete turnover now, and you put two issues together and there's going to be problems.
It's real easy to just imagine that when you have multiple individuals conducting training at the same time, that error rates are going to go up.
Even though experienced pilots and controllers tend to be more aware of the danger of runway incursions, experience itself does not prevent mistakes from happening.
It's a mistake that anybody can make. You know, if you believe you're in one position but you're actually some other place, you can make the mistake and not realize that that's what you're doing.
Even professional pilots make those mistakes. Student pilots, it's just one of those things you just watch for. I have an expectation that a student pilot is going to make mistakes. I have an expectation that even though there's an instructor on board, they've got their hands full trying to teach the student, much the same as us, trying to teach the student we're going to miss things too.
Increasing workload and traffic complexity, combined with new and complex technology, also plays an important role.
The number of aircraft out there appears to be increasing, the congestion appears to be increasing, and we share airspace. You know, it's everybody's out there using it, from military to small hobbyists to the commercial operations to, you know, commercial and corporate groups.
I think what it is it's a victim of its own success, in that we become so successful in air transportation that, you know, we're the prime way to travel. And so we've added so much capacity to our system, and we're trying to do so much with just a limited amount of capacity, that we're looking at absolutely any way to turn more airplanes in and out of there. And so basically, the more operations you have and the more humans involved, the more error that can happen. You know, you're tasking people with multiple things to do. I really think part of it is the increase in technology load. We're multitasking more than ever, and the technology is tricky at times, a lot of touch screen, a lot of, you know, different things. And so I think that you're asking people to do a lot with the amount of time they have. You know, it used to be 3 people in a cockpit, we're down to 2. You know, so you're not spreading out the workload now, you're bringing it in to more workload on those 2 people there. I think the same thing's probably happening in the tower. You've got increased technology, which is really gee whiz neat things, but you've got way more of it now to watch.
The layout of an airport can also increase the risk of a runway incursion. Confusing runway and taxiway layouts can be quite a challenge for pilots, especially at night or in poor weather, and signage and other markings play a big role too.
At its worst, it can be confusing and just add to the problem. At its best, it can remove any sort of question or ameliorate any situations that might result in a runway incursion.
Large, busy airports have huge volumes of traffic, and they also tend to have complicated taxiway geometry. And so both of those things are working against pilots.
One of the hardest things for pilots to do, believe it or not, is taxiing in large, busy airports where the diagrams are very complex and the taxiways are numerous, and it can be very confusing. It's much easier to fly in a straight line in the air than it is sometimes to maneuver on the airport surface.
But we all understand that airports have complicated pavement, and sometimes they're built a certain way because they have to be built a certain way. You know, you've got a limited amount of real estate to work with. And I will be the first to tell you, especially at night or in periods of poor visibility, it can be downright confounding sometimes to figure out exactly which way you're supposed to turn.
I think signage plays an interesting role. Our signs are very rudimentary. Yellow and black, black and yellow, red and white, white and red. So not tricky at all. But you know, easily missed, I think. We've gone to surface painted signs. We're now, besides having an illuminated sign, we're now painting the sign on the surface of the pavement. So we tell you where you're at, where you're going. But again, you're looking at complex airfields. Pilots are flying to 10, 12, 15 airfields. You know, they all start to look the same. And a lot of times we don't number and name things in any sort of sequential order. So why is, you know, this taxiway this name and this one something unrelated? There's not a lot of rhyme or reason that goes into that. So I think the more runways you get and the more complex the taxiways get, kind of you ripen yourself for problems.
However, the risk of a runway incursion is not limited to large, complex airports.
People tend to let their guards down at smaller airports. There's only one runway and one taxiway and nothing else out here. What could go wrong? And sure enough, you know, then comes the truck or the mower or wildlife on the runway or something like that. You know, and if you're not expecting it and ready to react, that can really result in a bad situation.
It can happen to anybody. And so whether the airport is large or small, the risk is still there.
Controller is probably a little easier because we're going to work at the same place, you know, normally every day. So we know what to expect. But a pilot flying in and out of numerous airports, one day it might be a busy airport, the next hour it could be a slow airport.
So far, we've seen 5 overall causes that lead to runway incursions: lack of situational awareness, complacency, lack of experience, workload, and airport complexity. Now let's see what solutions are available to help enhance runway safety and prevent incursions. All our experts agreed that enhancing situational awareness is the single best preventative measure.
In air traffic control, situational awareness is really the key of success. Your ability to not only be looking in the right place and anticipating where your greatest risks are, but to look and correctly identify what's happening to the people who are involved. That looking into the future, being able to now anticipate what are the implications of this decision I just made. What are the risks that are now present that weren't present before?
I think it's incumbent on every pilot and every controller to constantly be aware of their surroundings. Your ability to be able to chew gum, walk, talk, and read a book, I mean, that's kind of an old adage, but it's so critical in this career field to be able to multitask.
So what are some methods controllers can use to enhance their situational awareness?
Eyes. Your eyes. Anytime you clear an aircraft for takeoff, you should scan up and down the runway, including short final, and if you have any crossing runways, scan left and right of that runway as well to make sure that there's nobody going to be doing anything silly.
Know your airport, know what could precede or happen if you give a departure clearance. You shouldn't be sitting down in a chair issuing a clearance for takeoff or landing. You should be standing up, scanning your runway, look down the runway once and then back again.
Sit at home, watch TV, read a newspaper, and try and have a conversation with somebody all at the same time, and be able to pick up important parts from each of the three. The better you are at doing that, the better you are going to be able to maintain your situational awareness in busy traffic.
Effective communication is another important aspect of maintaining a safe runway environment.
The doctrine in pilot training tends to be aviate, navigate, and then communicate. But communication to the other folks that you can, whether it's the pilot beside you or meta-communication yourself, is key. If you drop anybody out of the loop, including yourself, you're bound to get behind, and then your risk for runway incursions goes up.
Communication is essential. It's essential inside the cockpit as well as outside the cockpit.
Communication failures can occur. There can be misunderstandings, and there can be people who even do readbacks, but yet still don't comply, for whatever reason, distraction or forgetting or something.
Listen to what you've said, listen to what the pilot responds. So it's a read back, hear back. Did we get the word out right? Was it in an articulate fashion? Was it spoken at a good pace as opposed to a rapid fire? Runway 28 right, taxi via Charlie, hold short, runway 16. That's too much. Let's bring it down to another level. Runway 28 right, taxi via Charlie, and put the emphasis later, hold short, runway 16. And then you've got that out there, and someone's hearing a different voice inflection. They're hearing maybe a higher piece of information, hold short, and that would help out immensely.
Above all, pilots and controllers must remember that reading back hold short instructions is vital.
But a read back of hold short instructions is mandated by regulations, whether it's our FAA handbook or the pilot's aeronautical information manual.
We're trained to listen for that, and we're trained very heavily to ensure that the pilot reads that stuff back. We're very quick to remind the pilot that they should have read that back.
Another point to consider is that it's important to listen to what a pilot is saying. Beyond just the words coming out of his or her mouth, the way they are speaking can be a sign of whether someone needs help.
The way people say things can often be more of a clue than to what they actually say. And if they sound distracted or sound confused or overwhelmed or don't respond, that certainly is an indication of how well they're doing.
If a pilot is scared, you can definitely hear it in their voice. If they're unsure of themselves or if they're lost, there's a definite tone difference in the voice.
Be aware and get that sense of whether the pilot sounds like he knows what he's doing or if he doesn't sound like he knows what he's doing.
Sometimes when a pilot is lost or confused, it may be up to the controller to proactively offer assistance and to improvise if necessary.
If they are unsure of their location or their clearance, they need to ask ATC for assistance, as well as controllers, if they sense that a pilot is unsure of where they're going, make sure to provide further assistance.
Pilots, you have to keep in mind, pilots have pride and sometimes pilots may be a little bit afraid to admit that they don't know exactly where they're going.
You know, the great thing about air traffic control is that we both have a microphone. The pilot has a microphone and the controller has a microphone. The .65 gives us a specific set of rules and a specific set of phraseology to be able to deal with certain circumstances. Not all circumstances are in that book. You're gonna have to pull something out of your back pocket because there's nothing written on how to deal with every situation. So a simple question: can I do something for you? Do you need help? Would you like progressive taxi? Is there something else I can do to make your life easier? Key the microphone and simply ask that. Use the call sign and use your facility identifier if that's appropriate. But whatever happens between those two items, it's just not important as long as you get your message across.
Teamwork in the tower cab is another way to prevent issues associated with runway incursions.
We preach and we constantly lecture on the team responsibilities for the tower. Ground control has an obligation to assist the tower controller, local control, in scanning the runways, and local control has a priority of scanning the runways and making sure nothing is out there whatsoever before they even start their clearance for takeoff or clearance for landing.
It's no different than being on a basketball or a hockey team or any other team. You simply do what's right and you watch out for your fellow player, your fellow controller. That's the name of the game. It's a team.
I think you have a moral obligation in the tower, and everybody's responsible for, you know, that runway observation to make sure that runway's clear or that taxiway is clear. And being a profession that we are, if we see something's wrong, I think we need to be able to work together and inform the individuals that's working whatever position is that, hey, this is happening. Not in a condescending way that, hey, you made a mistake, but here's a situation that's happening, it needs to be corrected.
A fourth issue raised by industry experts is the need for more training on issues related to runway safety.
If you look at the rates, the accident rates, when you look at the runway incursion rates, when we're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars of technology at this issue, and the human error is still at least 70% of why this is happening. Whatever we are doing for training, it needs to increase.
It's now required quarterly for all training for air traffic controllers. And here at the University of North Dakota in our CTI program, we put an emphasis on it, I believe, in the first Aviation 103 course, where it's called situational awareness. Be aware of what's going around you and what your surroundings are, especially in the tower cab.
That's one of the main focal points when you first come into the agency. At the academy, they really hit on that hard. And then when you first get to your first tower facility, and it's one of the biggest emphasis items that we touch on is runway incursions and how to prevent them.
Even though the FAA has placed an increased emphasis on training for controllers, sometimes controllers need to be aware that the training pilots receive can vary considerably.
Professional pilots are all going into the simulator every year. Typically, simulator training events are very busy. We have a lot of material that needs to be covered in a recurrent period of time. And so runway safety is usually not covered in a tremendous amount of detail. That's not to say that professional pilots aren't thinking about it. It's just not necessarily covered in the simulator.
Industry-wide, it's probably not stressed enough the way it should be. Most of the time, flight training occurs out of a very small number of airports that you get familiar and used to what's happening at that airport, how communication occurs at that airport. It'd be nice to see if pilots would go to a variety of different sized airports with different controllers and get more experience in more complex environments.
Some aspects of pilot training, such as crew resource management or CRM, can also be beneficial to controllers.
Well, a lot of the CRM is to basically be able to, identify, prioritize, delegate. And if controllers do that, they can identify what's the most critical point that the pilot is going to be, what are the critical decisions that they'll be making? What are the critical mistakes they could be making? And then we support each other by verifying certain actions.
One thing CTI students should keep in mind is that good habits begin even before being hired by the FAA.
I think when you're in the simulator that to get into a mindset that, hey, this is a real environment, when you do see something like an aircraft taxi on the runway or across the runway that hasn't been approved to, that you note that, whether you're working in the local position or the ground position, you pass that on and do the moral thing and assist your colleague that's working in another position. Simple things like read back all hold short instructions. If a pilot or a pseudo-pilot doesn't do that, go back and reemphasize, read back hold short instructions. I think just doing those things will help you here, and that'll just progress with you as you go to the field and work in the FAA.
Changing the ways airports are designed and developing new technology also help reduce the risk of runway incursions.
I don't think we've ever found a perfect airport layout. This one works all the time, there's no issues. We kind of are working with what we have left from World War II. One of the solutions we've seen at Denver, at Detroit, at Dallas is end-run taxiways. So you get off the end of the runway and you basically taxi around almost like you're on a freeway back to the terminal. People in Denver complain it's a 25-minute taxi. And so there's no perfect solution. Whether you're waiting to get crossed over an active or you're end run taxiing for 20 minutes, you're probably going to waste the same amount of time. Although if you're end running, ATC can still run the traffic flow, so it's probably a little bit better in the long run.
I've seen a lot of research in my position as a professor here about systems ranging from something as crazy sounding as having all aircraft equipped with essentially an anti-lock brake system that's controlled by or can be controlled by air traffic control, and where you just hit the stop button and that airplane's going to stop, if you're rolling up to a hold short line. It sounds crazy, but it's been proposed. From that to things in the pavement that come up, like a stop cable on an aircraft carrier. That's another crazy one. But I suppose in an emergency situation, that would cause less damage than having an aircraft taxi onto a live runway. And then, of course, there are the new lighting systems, the stoplight system, which makes a lot of intuitive sense, especially because pilots mostly all drive cars and understand how that works. And, of course, various other little changes, too, in procedure in the air traffic controller's book and things like that. There are a lot of options, all of which I think have some value, some of which maybe only hypothetical value, but all have value in the sense that they raise awareness.
We know that short-term memory is where auditory signals go. So when you get a radio call, that's an auditory signal. It goes into the short-term memory that doesn't last very long and can't hold very much. And if that's what we're counting on to hold it, should we be now going to a visual symbol? The way the human works right now, we can't really improve short-term memory. We can improve training and awareness, but the basic human capability to function may not change.
One area where technology can help is in poor weather or other minimum visibility conditions. Ground radar such as ASDI or ASDX is one such tool.
A lot of times when it's IFR, the tower's way off and they can't see you. They have to take your word for it where you're reporting your position, and if you're not sure where your position is, then everyone's at risk. And so they can see everybody on the ground now. Whereas before, like Mode C transponders, you could see them in the air, it would report your altitude. This reports where you're on the ground. So an aircraft that's taxiing into the gate, we can exactly see how close they are to the gate now.
Technology outside the aviation world is also being used to help pilots and controllers develop awareness of runway safety issues. The internet is being used by several aviation organizations to develop online training programs that can be used by people of all levels of experience.
There's been a lot of training technologies incorporated through the FAA's website as well as AOPA's website that pilots can go to get additional training with situation scenarios to learn about runway incursions and runway safety.
However, despite the advantages of technology, our experts warn against relying on it exclusively.
There's a lot of technology. I think all of that is great, but I still think if the human factor of situational awareness is maintained on the pilot, the vehicle, personnel, or the controller, that would have a bigger impact than any type of technology.
Technology has been improving by the year, but the runway incursion rate is not going down by the year. So technology will not be our answer. It's going to be the human being.
Coming up next, we'll look at how ground vehicles affect airport operations.
According to the 2008 Runway Safety Report, what is the most common reason for controller errors and operational deviations? A. Inaccurate pilot readbacks. B. Improper or incomplete coordination with other controllers. C. Lack of proper equipment. Or D, controllers forgetting about aircraft or vehicles? The answer is D. The most common reason for operational errors and deviations was controllers forgetting about aircraft and vehicles. What factor that leads to runway incursions is common to both pilots and vehicle operators? A, improper readback followed by improper action. B, proper readback followed by improper action. C, lack of proper training. D, forgetting to read back, hold short instructions. The answer is B. Many runway incursions are caused by a pilot or vehicle operator reading back instructions correctly, but then doing something that was not authorized.